Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lifetime Legacy Lawyer podcast. I am Thomas Vick, joined by the other co-host of this podcast, Seth Wilson. Seth, how are you today?
Thomas, I'm doing great. We had a little snow on the ground this morning up here in north central Indiana, so I was a little surprised to look out on the white covered yard. Glad I got my leaves raked up over the weekend and just a beautiful sight.
Yeah, had to brush off some snow off of my wife's vehicle this morning, so I was a few minutes later than usual to the office today, but we got it done and ready to go. It was 65 degrees on Tuesday, and today's Thursday, and it is freezing cold outside.
If you don't like the weather in Indiana, wait 5 minutes.
That's right.
That's been my experience. But
That's right.
I love the changing of the seasons. It's one of the benefits of living in our great state, and it's fun to see that snow on the ground until it starts to melt and make everything a mess. We'll enjoy it while it's white and pristine.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I saw a note on your blog digest this week about estate planning for millennials. And, I'm right on the cusp of that definition, if you will, depending on how that's defined. So if millennials are getting sort of dragged through a reputational challenge in the news, I sort of say, yeah, I'm not a millennial. But if
You're
it
not
goes the
one.
other way,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I'm a millennial, so millennials are cooler than whatever generation you're a part of, Generation X or whatever it might be. I think millennials are the cool ones. I don't have any skinny jeans though, so I'm not I guess I'm not quite there.
you know,
By chronology, I'm a millennial.
That's right. That's right. Well, some of us, we have to take on that just approach of we can't just be cool all the time. We have to be professional and those kind of things. So
We
it's
got to
okay.
temper it. We've got to temper it.
That's right. That's right. But it is important to recognize that each generation does sort of grow up with an expectation or a reality about what they're going through and what their peers are going through. And so I think generationally it is helpful to understand that there are some markers that help define the boundaries there. And obviously, they're generalizations in a lot of ways. But one of the big questions is, well, if I am a millennial or in that time range, is it really too soon to begin any estate planning?
Yeah, and it certainly is not too soon to begin estate planning. We should probably back up and define what the chronology is of a millennial. I Googled what is a millennial prior to this podcast, and uh, Google tells me that millennial is a term used to describe a person born between 1981 and 1996. That's from Britannica.com, the definition of a millennial. So we're talking about people that are in their late 20s, 30s, and into their 40s. That's kind of the time period that we're talking about. So 28 to mid 40s. What kind of estate planning should these millennials do? And the first point that I would address is your health and getting an advanced healthcare directive. If you're at that age, events happen, accidents happen, and you need to have somebody that is in place to be able to make healthcare decisions for you if you're not able to make decisions for yourself. And that could be true for even an 18-year-old. But as you age, as people are in relationships, get married, have kids, then it becomes all the more important that you've got somebody that is authorized to be able to make those healthcare decisions for you.
Yeah, and that's an interesting terminology challenge that we have in Indiana, right? So has traditionally been what's called a healthcare power of attorney or an advance directive or designation of a healthcare representative. So when we use those terms, we're using them largely interchangeably. So you're thinking about someone who is authorized by you by virtue of a legal document to make healthcare decisions for you subject to the terms of that document. And so that document is very important, primarily because Once you have delegated that authority, oftentimes the healthcare decision making is very broad. And I always explain it in my talks with clients of once you have given up that authority, you have given up every medical decision up to and including withdrawal of care decisions, which is obviously a whole another discussion. We talked about kind of those living wills a little while back. So, very important to understand when that becomes effective and how you want it to become effective, and the terms and scope of the authority you want to delegate at that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's point number one, dealing with healthcare decisions. The next one is about show me the money, the financial power of attorney. Um, just because you haven't died yet doesn't mean somebody doesn't need to be authorized to be able to make financial decisions for you. You might be in a situation as something or 30-year-old or 40-year-old where you have an accident and you need somebody to step in and pay your bills for you, make sure that life insurance premiums are paid, and being able to talk to your financial advisor, and all of these different roles that a person does by himself or herself. But if you're not able to have those conversations or to send in those, the correspondence with all of these financial institutions, the bank, for instance, then you're going to need somebody to do that. And the financial power of attorney is the means by which somebody can be authorized to make financial decisions for you. The blog post says even if you don't have a mansion or a yacht, you still have bills and financial accounts that need managing. With a POA, you're covered. It might just be that you got a bank account. You don't have a farm that has to be taken care of, but you got some odds and ends that need to be taken care of, and the financial power of attorney is the way to do that.
Yeah, and it's such a peace of mind to have that decision already made. And again, that's one where you want to consider when does it become effective? And do you want to put some additional protections in so that it doesn't become effective until, for example, two independently licensed doctors would say you are incapable of managing your own affairs? Do you want to make it slightly less onerous to make that determination and leave it up to maybe a spouse and an attending physician? Or perhaps you want to make it effective immediately, and then either individual could then operate for you and move forward. So a lot of variables to think through, but ultimately having that document in place is what will facilitate your ability to access accounts, write checks, do those kind of things for the person you are the power of attorney for. Again, subject to the terms of that document and the fiduciary responsibility of looking out for the best interest of the person you are exercising that power for.
Yeah, all good points. The next topic here is your last wishes. Millennials need to understand the importance of having a will. Just because you're in your 20s and 30s doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a last will and testament. It's a smart move to have a last will and testament, even if you don't have people that are relying on you. As the blog suggests, you may want your sister to have your vinyl collection, but if you don't put it into place in a will, then she won't know. Or maybe it's a quirky mug collection and you want to pinpoint who that's supposed to go to. The only way to actually do that is through a last will and testament and an estate plan. And I'll let you kind of take it from there about, if you are a parent, what is the importance of having a last will and testament?
Yeah, and we've mentioned this many times on the podcast because of its importance to each generation, especially when you have children. The naming of a guardian and a trustee for the funds for the care and upbringing of those children should something happen to you. And so that if there are kids involved, just we can't emphasize enough the importance of having that last will and testament done and those guardian and trustee designations put into place to take care of those kids in the event of a tragedy.
Yeah, yeah. We're just kind of going a little bit quicker here on these next ones. Living in the digital age, millennials are the ones that are on their smartphones all the time, on their tablets, constantly scrolling through Twitter and Facebook, and even dabbling, maybe even more than dabbling, into cryptocurrency. And with all of that internet activity, they've developed a social media profile. They've got kind of an online footprint, as they say. And perhaps it might be important for a millennial to say, what happens with my digital footprint if, say I own uh, a piece of property that's in a video game that's worth tens of thousands of dollars, or just, having access to email and photographs, things like that. Talking through those issues and how to hand down those assets, digital assets, from one generation to the next. You need to really talk to an estate planning attorney about the best way of doing that. I know that in my practice, and you know about this as well, that sometimes you have to get a court order in order to get access to email accounts. And that can be, if there's litigation or something like that with your estate, maybe your personal representative has to make a claim against somebody. Having access to email can be beneficial, but that's something to talk about with an estate planning attorney, about how to manage your digital assets.
Absolutely. And it's such a reality because millennials often have grown up only in this connected digital world. And so the way that we transacted business before is different than it is now. Going to your bank requires you to go to a website. You can't just go to the branch. You've got to be able to have that intermediary, some kind of way to connect to your actual physical asset, your money, and that digital access, the ability to transfer funds and access and move those funds, is something that can be a real impediment to someone if that isn't authorized by either the power of attorney or the last will and testament, so that the people needing to act on your behalf need the authority to do so and need to see that that documentation is there. Very critical to have that piece of the puzzle addressed so that we can get access to those. Obviously, things like social media are important, but not as critical as maybe getting access to bank funds and those kind of things. And it's a good thing to think about in terms of your smartphone, because if that becomes your multi-factor authentication method and you don't know how to get into a loved one's phone, for example, you may not be able to get access to those accounts because you don't have whatever that multi-factor authentication code is via text message or something like that. And you'll need to figure out how the carriers can redirect those things or get another phone that you can get access to and start getting those codes so you can get back in. I mean, it can be quite a puzzle to figure out.
Yeah, it certainly can be a puzzle. And, you hear of terrible stories of a person having millions of dollars in Bitcoin, but they can't access the Bitcoin because they don't remember the password. You need to think about things like that, millennials. Think about, how are you going to be able to let other people have access to your accounts if you want them to have access to your
Right.
accounts in the future. The next topic that millennials need to be thinking about with respect to their estate planning is school loans, Ks, accounts. Inventorying things like that are a big part of estate planning. But you don't really need to throw all those details in the last will and testament. So you can kind of deal with, for instance, retirement accounts through beneficiary designations. Sometimes it's, a good idea to name a trust as the beneficiary of retirement accounts. Student loans, we were kind of talking about that before the podcast. And, there's always some concern about, is my spouse going to be responsible for my student loan? Some people have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, but then the spouse of that person doesn't have any or hardly any. And so understanding kind of what's at stake and how you're paying for those student loans is important. What are your thoughts on that? School loans, 401ks, and accounts galore.
I think in this segment of the population, in terms of if we're just talking about millennials, one thing to be really aware of is you may have had a couple of different job changes. And so you may have retirement plans or benefits from different jobs. And you may not have gone back and rolled that out. And it could be, a couple $100, or it could be a couple thousand or more in terms of where that is. And so you want to make sure that as you're thinking about that each sort of job that you've had, if it generated that retirement plan, that's now either beneficiary designated appropriately or maybe rolled over into a new account or something, to make sure you have access to that. Again, just to ensure, maybe you had it before you got married and you never put a beneficiary designation, or the beneficiary designation was somebody that you would rather be your spouse now. And so looking at all of those things is really a good point, or a good time to do that. And then we talked, I think, in the last podcast just about that sort of team of advisors. And as you're looking at what are the obligations we have if we have student loans, and what is the plan if something happens to me to pay those off or not pay those off and handle it through the estate process, what do we do with that? And just involving that as you think about like life insurance and those kind of things, and factoring in those calculations. It's a good time to take a look at that. Something very important, especially if you're talking about student loans from, maybe college and law school. Like a lot of our friends went through and came out with a substantial amount of loans to pay back.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Another aspect of millennials doing estate planning is that it can open up conversations with other family members. It can start the tough talks and have family conversations about end of life care. Millennials, as long as we're healthy and things are fine, estate planning it's somewhat of a stressful endeavor, but not too stressful. And we're thinking that, I've got decades and decades and decades to live still. I'm in the middle of my life. I'm doing fine. But it's also an opportunity to take a minute and say, hey, mom, dad, I'm doing my estate plan. Have you guys done your estate plan? What are your end of life care wishes? Have you guys thought about that? You should talk to an attorney about those concerns. And you can kind of help lead your parents and other family members into doing estate planning if you're a millennial and you're in the process of doing it.
Yeah. And the other side of that is, and we experience this at different points in our life, where we've talked about this sandwich generation. So if you're kind of in the middle of things, you've got maybe younger siblings and you've got maybe older parents, or maybe you're a little bit younger on that and your parents are a little bit older. And so they're facing things like the reality of needing in-home care or nursing home care. And now you're managing their life as well as your life, and those types of things are going to be really important to have all of the ducks in a row, so to speak, to make sure that you have access to not only handle things for yourself, but up the chain as well.
Yes, yes. And then the last point that we have on this blog post is life changes, estate plans change. People get married. Unfortunately, people get divorced. You lose loved ones. Children are born. All kinds of life changes happen. And so your estate plan can change with you. As millennials do their estate plan, they need to understand, whenever there's a significant life event, I need to have this reviewed. But then also, if I have maybe 5 years from now, I should have it reviewed no matter what. And so just understand that there needs to be some changes typically along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mentioned that sandwich generation. You may find yourself in a scenario where mom or dad wants to come back to where you live to be around the grandkids. And now we're thinking about housing and what do we do with that, and all of these different things that maybe we went in together to buy a house so everybody could kind of be around. But now we need to think about rights of occupancy if person A dies before person B, so we don't end up, in a bad situation down the road. Lots of variables there, lots of cool things that can be done within an estate plan as well. but just such an important point to address those things and ask the question, hey, this happened. Is there anything that we need to do to adjust our plan to make sure that it's going to work for us? And that's a great time. We always think about this at kind of an annual to 3 to 5 year basis, but anytime there's a major life change that is a significant thing for you, it's probably a good time to just pick up the phone or shoot an email out to the lawyer, or I think you mentioned Twitter or X or whatever it is now. I don't know that you can tweet at your lawyer. Maybe you can, but you probably won't find me there very often. But that's maybe because I'm not quite in that millennial generation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that does it for the topic today, 7 reasons why millennials need estate planning. A lot of topics that we talk about quite a bit, but in particular, why millennials need estate planning. Seth, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Thomas, we are located here in the heart of Hamilton County, Indiana, up in Noblesville, and that's our web address as well, noblesvilleattorney.com. You can go there and click on the Contact Us page, and that will get you in touch with us. How about yourself?
The best way to get in touch with me is by going to vicklaw.org. My law firm is located in Greenwood, Indiana, on the south side of Indianapolis. And the best way to get in touch with me is by, again, going to vicklaw.org. Seth, thanks so much for another episode. Look forward to the next one.
Sounds good, Thomas. Thank you.